The term Afro-Latino has become very popular in the United States for your generation, which means, well, I'm not sure what your generation is or that of your viewers, but let's say in the past 15 years in the US, the term Afro-Latino has become really important as a way for Latinos who are visibly Black, which means of some type of Afro descent in the US, to acknowledge both their Blackness and their Latinidad. So it's a term in the US that has a lot more currency now. However, it's actually a term that emerged with activists, primarily women, social activists, in Latin American countries in the 1980s and 1990s, in Brazil and in Colombia, for example. Okay, so there's a movement in Latin America and the Caribbean that advocates for the rights of Afro-descendientes, or Afro-nationals, like Afro-Brasileños or Afro-Colombianos. That's been going on since the 1980s. To be an immigrant to the United States, one of the things that you learn is to be anti-Black, okay? Part of participating in the immigrant experience, which means, the stereotype of hard work at any cost for my children, sacrifice everything. Part of that experience in the US requires distancing and distinction from African Americans in the US who have been represented as the opposite of an immigrant population and in a derogatory way, okay? So the anti-Blackness, one of the things that Afro-Latinx advocates and scholars are calling for is for the recognition that for many, that Latinidad itself, whatever country in Latin America or in the US, Latinidad itself is also defined by anti-Blackness, okay? And so it is not exceptional that your mother and others in your community are making a clear distinction between themselves and African Americans. Unfortunately, that is something that happens within Latino communities and immigrants, and it's something that Afro-Latinx scholars want to rebut, okay? However, that behavior also assumes that African Americans are a nice and discreet little population who are not us. But in fact, in the United States, Caribbean immigrants or Afro-Latinx immigrants and peoples eventually, their children eventually become part of the Black population in the US, okay? And because you're treated like a Black person and that's who you are in public, and you learn and you appreciate what that means, and you form alliances and become part of the Black community in the US. Especially in the Northeast, where Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, and African Americans have been cohabitating in the neighborhoods, have been working at the same jobs. There's, at the same time, there's a great distinction between I'm from Puerto Rico, I'm not African American, or I'm Dominican, so I'm not African American. At the same time that we say that, we're failing to recognize that those who you're calling African American, especially in the New York area, 25% of the Black community in New York was from the Caribbean in the 1920s, right? So those who are Black today that we try to distinguish from as immigrants are really some of them are Afro-Latinx peoples that we have excluded, not we, but have been excluded from the Latino category, okay? It is logical that your mom comes from a country and embraces a narrative and a myth that does not diminish her as a human being, right? And when she comes to this country, the Dominican identity for her is so nurturing, positive, and inclusive that she's gonna pass that down to you. But she may not be fully aware that once you leave your Dominican house and you're out in the streets, that belief is not gonna protect you from being treated like any other Black person in the US. That's your experience, and so you'll have different reactions. But it's not that your mom was duped, it's that your mom is a product of a specific time period, a specific country, and it's logical that she would retain those things that are positive and affirming and pass them on to her children, even though the children in the US, so know that makes no kind of sense because that doesn't correspond to their experience in the US. now that Black Lives Matter has gone from being seen as outside pariah group to a fundamentally a group that demands the rights of Black people in the United States, and no one can question that. And it's international, domestically, it's become huge. It's also become, it's not just Black people marching, it's become multicultural and inclusive in some ways, even though at the core it's advocating for Black Lives Matter. The level of awareness that we have of police violence is such that it can't be denied, right? And so we have the language and the movement in Black Lives Matter, this youth movement pushing for civil rights and human rights. Black people within the Latino community, when a cop stops you, they're not gonna say, she's Dominican, so maybe I won't treat her the same as I would an African American. They often just see Black. I have speeding tickets from back in the day. They don't say Puerto Rican, I think Black. They say Black, My medical record says Black. So we're treated as Black people in the US. We should be as equally, and are, as equally invested in citizenship rights, human rights, and Black Lives Matter. So, exactly all these things that are part of our everyday as Afro-Latinos in the US is now undeniable in a way that's almost dangerous and unsafe for us to put our head down. This is an opportunity to form alliances with those outside of the Afro-Latinx community and with those inside to demand for rights alongside the BLM movement. We want to replace the way we talk to our friends, the way we teach our children. There's only so much our parents want to hear from us. About how we are every day choosing to reproduce colorism, xenophobia, and racism. That's one thing, is to be aware of that and to try to break it apart as best we can. That's one strategy. The other strategy is revolution, you know what I mean? And there's many different historical origins to revolutions. But where we are right now is full awareness that we live in a patriarchal society and a racist society. And that we come from countries who are by definition racist, even though they have different narrative myths about national identity. The Afro-Latinx generation, right? The youth, this new generation, is intolerant of the assumptions behind racism and difference, and gender equity and sexual orientation in ways different than their parents' generation. And so I think just like we are seeing such dramatic change with the BLM movement, which in some ways is leading to immediate policy changes, in other ways it's resistance, but at least conversation about what we live in and what we reproduce. Afro-Latinx peoples have to demand the same in the US. But it's not just a responsibility for those who look Afro-Latinx. It's really a responsibility for all Latinos to demand that we reevaluate the racial othering and discrimination that we practice every day in our homes and our communities.